my life, but I think I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be alive.
And then how long was that rehab at Fitzsimmons?
That was 9 months total, because I got discharged from the military on the 22nd of November, 1969. And that's occupational therapy, working with a prosthetic arm, making sure that you can use it and function with it. I had prosthetic legs, walked in the parallel bars, but it's not anything you're going to use the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And even if you fast forward today's modern limbs with computers in them and everything else, it still wouldn't work for a triple amputee in my condition. And you wouldn't be able to function the same way that I do today, to be able to get out and go and do things and be aggressive, if you had to worry about trying to put those things on, deal with them all day long, worry about falling somewhere, not being able to get back up. So, I mean, it was a real easy decision for me in like October, early November 69, that we'll just put those in a trunk someplace and have great memories about walking in the parallel bars.
So you were done with rehab in 9 months?
Well, really, once you heal, and if you're not going to do anything further with prosthetic legs, and they need a bed because they're still killing and injuring a lot of people in Vietnam in November 1969, you got to move on. Something's got to happen.
So 1969, this is at the height of like anti-war protests, and Woodstock was in August of 1969. Are you paying attention to any of that? Is that entering your world at all? Or
well, we're watching it on the ward in the day room, and probably just getting a tremendous amount of enjoyment out of it, because we're all sitting around. We're all Vietnam combat soldiers, on the ward. So, I think some people actually talk about maybe we should go to Woodstock. I don't think anybody did, though.
But did you feel like I know that our treatment from the wars that we've been in the last couple decades, we've had great treatment for the most part. We've had incredible treatment from not just from people, from normal citizens. That it's thank you for your service, it's thank you for what you did, regardless of whatever their political beliefs are as well. It's like most people say, hey, we know that you were doing your job, and that's thank you. Did you feel that, or did you feel like it was? Did you get the negative feedback that we often hear about from Vietnam vets?
I never got any of the negative personally. I know a lot of people who did, and most of that was people who came back uninjured, who got off of that same transport at Travis Air Force Base or up at Fort Lewis, Washington, and moved to a civilian aircraft. Most of them would change out of their military clothing into civilian clothing so that they couldn't be recognized or wouldn't be readily identified as returning from Vietnam. The only thing that I ever really experienced, and I didn't know this until after I got to Fitzsimmons, was Lowry Air Force Base used to be right in downtown Denver. And that's normally where the transport would have brought me, would have been to Lowry. But because they were having protesters outside the gate at Lowry Air Force Base, they landed in an old World War II field called Buckley Field outside of Denver, and the protesters never knew where that was at. So then they'd load you on the hospital bus and take you right to the hospital.
Luckily, the protesters weren't smart enough to figure that out. So you get done with this. You get discharged from the Army. That's it. And now
we go home.
And now what's your plan now?
Didn't have the faintest idea. Wish I could tell you I'd really thought that one out in a big way. But I mean, I think you're kind of still in a form of survival mode at that point. You know what I mean? Each new experience, I mean, getting in and out of the shower, getting on and off of a commode, feeding yourself, putting clothes on, wondering if you're going to be able to drive again, are the things that are paramount in your mind at that point, because you know what it takes to do stuff out there in the world. And I mean, I would go to physical therapy, I'd go to occupational therapy, I'd come back to the ward, and I'd be thinking about things and my Catholic upbringing in Minnesota and the Bible and things that take place. I'm waiting for something outside my hospital ward window, like a burning bush or a bolt of lightning, and there's going to be a revelation, Jim Searsley, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It never happened. It didn't come. So, now I'm still praying, but I'm actually getting angry with God at this point because I'm not getting any answers. And maybe he's answering things, but I'm not smart enough to recognize it. I don't know. But I think what I actually did at that point, which I think is my survival and what allowed me to move forward with my life, was I surrendered. I said to God, here's the deal. Your job is to take care of a vision or things that you have in store for me for the rest of my life. My job is to do occupational therapy, physical therapy, and maybe as new guys come in, my job is to help inspire them to realize that there's still going to be a life beyond the injuries you've sustained. And, it's not like you did that one day and the next day it was perfect. It was still a process. Every day you'd have to kind of go through that little bit of surrender all the time until you finally just came to the conclusion that if you just relax, do what you're supposed to do, everything else is going to be okay. And it truly turned out that way.
So that when you were going to occupational therapy, are you still at Fitzsimmons when you're talking about that?
Right.
And so now you're helping people out. You get this kind of point in your life where you say, okay, I'm going to do my part and I'm going to let God handle his part. I'm not going to worry about what he's going to do with me. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do right now. You do that for 9 months. When you get done at Fitzsimmons, where do you go?
I went back home to Rochester, Minnesota, and stayed at my parents' house. And I remember specifically the chief of physical medicine said to my mom when they were there, said, now, whatever you do, when you get him home, I don't want you to wait on him all the time because that's the worst thing you can possibly do. And, they're explaining that to your mother, and you're 21 years old, and she knows this guy's full of shit because I'm going to go home and just baby him like he was 2 years old. So I sat on the couch not every day, but on the couch, and I tell her to bring me the remote and change the channel and get me a Pepsi and do all that kind of stuff. And finally, about 30 days into it, I said something to her one day, and she said, why don't you get off your sorry ass and get it yourself? And I said, Mom, I just can't believe it took you 30 days to give me that response.
You milked it as long as you could.
I did. I said, well, I don't know if you knew it, Mom, but I overheard the chief of physical medicine tell you that, so I had to use it.
So then once, so you're living at home, and what did that look like?
It's kind of a scary experience because you're going back to an able-bodied world. Even though the Mayo Clinics there in Rochester, Minnesota, they're still streets don't have curb cuts. Buildings are not level to the ground. Every building doesn't have an elevator to get you to the second floor. The Americans with Disability Act didn't come into play until the late 70s or early 80s. So, it wasn't like anybody had to do anything to accommodate disabled people. There were not a lot of disabled people on the street, out in public, either working or going to school or anything else. There was a system off to the side, I think, for disabled people. But I think Vietnam veterans came back and were vocal and pushy and just decided we weren't willing to accept that as being the standard, and that's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So primarily I came back and I started junior college. And then at least when you're in school, there's vet groups at school, so you had that sharing again. If I had difficulty getting from one location to another, I could holler at somebody, they'd give me a push to my next class, or carry books and I'd push, whatever. So, little by little you realized you got to swallow a little bit of pride, and you may need that help at times if you're going to get back into civilian life, if you're going to be part of it, and if you want to join the human race, that's what you're going to have to do, is accept some help and some guidance along the way. So that's what I did. And little by little, that just gets better every day and every week and every year.
So what did you start studying in school?
Well, I wanted to be a CPA until I actually got to all those big, long ledger sheets, and I said, oh, my God, really? I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I just changed to general business.
General business. And then you graduate from junior college?
Graduated from junior college, went to what's now called the University of Central Florida. It was called FTU at the time. Continued towards a business degree, but did not finish and get a degree. But I finished about halfway through my senior year.
And then what did you do?
I went to work.
And what'd you go to work doing?
Well, I've been a real estate agent for 40 years in Florida. And then I'm also a real estate investor, and I have a small roofing company.
So straight from school, you must have started to delve into real estate before you decided you were going to leave school.
I had actually, I knew the guy real well that owned the real estate company. And he had asked me, because they had a van, which a lot of people with wheelchairs use, we would carry his real estate signs out, the bigger ones and smaller ones, and I would drive and he would put up the signs. He was fairly new in the business too. So I think that just sort of got me excited about what he was doing. And he would say, you need to go get your real estate license. I said, yeah. When was the last time you bought a house from a guy in a wheelchair missing 2 legs and an arm? He goes, don't worry about it. They'll never even notice. I mean, that's just the kind of guy he was.
It sounds like he was right.
He was, absolutely. It doesn't take arms and a leg to explain to people that this thing has a bathroom, central air and heat, 3 bedrooms, and all that kind of stuff. Usually most people are pretty intelligent unless they're blind and they can't see it. They can pretty well figure out what it is. My pointing those things out doesn't make them want to buy it. What it is and where it is usually why they buy it. So.
And is that what you ended up doing for your whole career? You said you've been doing it for 40, or you did it for 40 years, or?
I got my real estate license in 1978, and then, of course, as part of selling things, deals come along that are worth owning. So I would buy them, kept them for rental property, and still have all those today.
Nice moves. I got to ask you this because a lot of vets listen to this. What did you see in terms of alcohol and drugs, especially when you were in rehab, when you're coming out of rehab? What did you see? What was your attitude? How did you avoid going down the path of where people end up, either addicted to alcohol or addicted to drugs?
And that's a kind of a good question because there was a lot of that. There were a lot of guys, especially alcohol, because you could just go off the base and go someplace in the evening. The drugs, I think they were a little less likely to give you more than you actually needed during the Vietnam era. That was my experience. And my father was an alcoholic, so I'm sure probably in the back of my mind, the use of it or abuse of it was probably something I was conscious of all the time. But that never really looked like that was a great alternative path. I mean, I thought that was fairly easy to recognize that wasn't good. And I'm not critical of anyone that chose that because everybody's psyche and the way they're handling things at that time, the difficulties they're going through, or just being out in public missing 2 legs and an arm, maybe you need to be high to do that. I never felt that way. I didn't feel like I needed to explain anything to anybody, had to put on any particular performance or airs to make people accept me. If you didn't accept me, I'm okay with that too. You know what I mean? That was fine because I'm just going to do what I need to do for my survival and for me to move forward. And I had a lot of support from family and friends that allowed me to be that way.
Man, I wish I could spread that word to basically everyone, not to worry about what other people are think. Do what you're supposed to do. At what point did you link up with the DAV?
Well, the DAV initially gave me what they call a complimentary membership. All Vietnam-era veterans that were injured got that. That was in 1970. And then I moved from Minnesota to Florida in March of 1971. And my wife at the time said, what are you going to do about that membership in the DAV? And I said, I really hadn't given it much thought. I was busy with the job that I had moved there for. And I don't know, she looked it up, I think, one time and said, well, there's a chapter in